Welcome, innovative teachers, to our mini holiday series. We are talking to some current teachers and other amazing people who are going to bring us awesome information about STEM and technology and other things that you're going to enjoy. Today, we're talking with Marshall from the Tumble Science Podcast for Kids. And when Spencer told me that we were going to have him on our show, I got super, super excited. This is a podcast I've been recommending to kids and families for years. And this is such a treat that we have him here today. So we can't wait for you guys to listen to this episode and learn with us. Thank you so much for being here, Marshall. I have used your podcast for years. I was a classroom teacher before I was a STEM teacher, and I just wanted another way to engage my students, and I stumbled upon Tumble. But I
like that rhymes.
Yeah, the cat in the hat, if you didn't know that. But I love your podcast so much, and so I can't wait for other teachers to hear more about what you do and all of that for kids. So if you wouldn't mind telling us about your podcast and what it's all about.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I feel like there's a lot in the name. So it's a science podcast for kids. And the main differentiator between what we do and what a lot of other science podcasts do is, we're less about sort of the whiz bang science facts kind of stuff and more about communicating to kids the process of science, and communicating that it's a way of finding stuff out, and that really professional scientists aren't all that different from kids with a cool question to figure out. So every question or every episode, we usually begin with a kid question of some kind, and then we bring it to an expert where they tell us not just the answer, but also sort of how scientists went ahead and found out the answer to that question. And a lot of times we're talking to scientists about their own research, and it's just super cool.
I love how you talked about right there the process, because a lot of times when I tell kids, like, they're always like asking what science is about, or even teachers, how do we approach science standards? I feel like it's so much more about the process and how we get to that conclusion than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's so important, and there's so much oh goodness. See, this is one of those like rambly things that you should just edit out. It's so important, I think, not just for producing kids who become scientists, but kids who are engaged citizens. I think it's important to understand that science is a process, and it's constantly evolving, and there are things that we thought 10 years ago that we now realize were wrong, or mostly right, or just constantly getting revised and stuff. So I think a lot of people come to science thinking it's a bunch of facts in a book, and it's just this totally static thing, and your goal as a student is to then memorize the book, and the ones who memorize it the best are the ones who have the most success. But really, it's just the book is constantly changing, and the stuff in there is constantly being revised. And I think, when people approach science not that way, they end up getting disappointed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I love how you talk about that change there. That's awesome. The book is changing. I wrote that down because I think I might say that to people when they ask me, like different teachers, because people ask us that all the time. Do they not, Naomi?
Oh, they do, for sure. And sometimes I think when you're getting started with STEM, you might even forget some of the science parts about it and how it is interactive and always changing. And it can also be super fun. And I think your podcast makes it so fun because science is fun. I mean, it should be. You're learning about the world in a different way. And your podcast makes it so fun. I feel like you totally you guys have no idea how much fun it is. You totally understated it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, that sort of reminds me when we were in the early phases of developing the podcast. We started in 2015, shortly after my oldest son, who's now 6, was born. And one of the first things we did was we were sort of like, well, let's try out some experiments. And I think you can still find a video of an experiment we did on YouTube where we were basically trying to create a go-kart that was powered by baking soda volcano rockets.
Oh, cool.
Oh my goodness, that's
Um,
awesome.
And I don't know if you've ever done the baking soda volcano rocket where, you just put baking soda and vinegar in a bottle with a cork, put it upside down, and then it goes and flies like 50 feet up in the air. And, so we did like an experiment to get the exact ratio of baking soda and vinegar that provided the most oomph. And then mounted it on a wine rack on a skateboard to see if we could get it to move. We failed, but there was just so much giggling involved in that project. Like there were, 7 35-year-old adults, 2 of whom had PhDs. And like everybody, when we first tried to launch the thing, like it was just like everybody was giggling. It was so much fun.
That's awesome. I love that you talked about that project too, because I do something kind of close to that. And you kind of already hit on this question, but I wanted you kind of elaborate more on it. So as far as the podcast, how have you seen it kind of affect kids and students overall? Like, what are some stories that, make you keep on producing the content you do?
Oh man, stories. We get a lot of listener feedback. And it's just, I think the biggest thing is when kids send their questions. That's what's really interesting, because kids ask questions that are just like, wow. And, one of my favorite examples of that is we did an episode with Katie Mack about the end of the universe. And the question was, is there an end to the universe?
Oh.
And that came from a kid, right? It's like, does the universe have an end? And then my favorite and most memorable thing about that episode is the scientist's answer was probably not, but we don't know for sure. And and it's just like, this incredibly profound, deep question that I think the kid was maybe 6 or 7. This 6 or 7-year-old kid had at the time, that is really getting at the heart of stuff that like we still don't really know. Like, does the universe have an end?
Right.
We haven't found it yet.
That is so cool.
Yeah. And it's just that sort of like, we get questions every now and again, and they're just always so inspiring, because kids ask crazy things and they're not crazy to them.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great way to word it too. Oh my goodness. I love that too. They do ask crazy things. And I mean, the craziest part about being a teacher is sometimes when they ask them, kind of like that, person on your podcast, I'll be like, honestly, I have no idea. I was like, I'll look into it for you, but I don't know. I mean,
yeah. You look it up and it turns out like maybe nobody knows. And then it's just like, huh.
It's like,
wow.
You'll figure it out one day.
that too, yeah.
Yeah, and like one of my son's questions for me one time was like, how did dogs become real? It's just like, I'm not sure how to answer that. What does it mean to be real?
Yeah.
Oh, that's really deep.
That is. I mean, I feel like it's incredible that kids are able to think that deep, and when they're doing like, listening to your podcast like that, they're inspired to ask those questions, because in education, a lot of times, it's like, don't ask nonsense questions, and don't ask this and don't do this. So I think it's cool that they have a space for them on the internet where they can ask those questions, and people are like you said, real people are trying to look into those solutions and different experts. And that has to be so cool for those kids to make their voice feel heard.
Yeah, I mean, I hope so. I think that's what we're aiming to do. And I think, I think a big mistake that we can often make as educators is like unconsciously sending the message that, you got to have it all figured out before you even raise your hand. And I think it's it's not intentional, but a lot of the times we'll ask a question and we know the answer, right? So there's a right answer we're looking for. And it's not so often that we'll ask a question and be like, I don't know what's going to happen. I think that's there are good reasons for that. I mean, I've been in the classroom, and that's terrifying if you don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's really a big part of what we're trying to do is just communicate that, like, asking questions is fun, curiosity is fun, exploring and learning. I mean, it's what we were built to do as monkey people.
Yes.
Right. I love that.
Do you have any suggestions for teachers like who want to get started with listening to podcasts? Because we're not asking them to make podcasts, which is a totally different beast. I know when I used your podcast in particular, when I use it, we would listen during snack time, and then the kids would have sticky notes, and we would create a wonder wall of all the questions that were developed while we were listening to your podcast. So I like also you can pick and choose things that would like go along with what we're learning about. Or sometimes we would just randomly pick one, like, okay, which one are we going to do today? But if there's people who are like nervous about getting started or just don't understand why they should listen to podcasts with their kids, what would you say for them?
Well, I mean, I think there are a couple of good reasons, and I'll start with the first reason. This actually comes from a white paper that came out produced by a company called Listenwise, which does they're like a curriculum platform for audio material that you can, that school districts can buy and integrate into their LMS platforms. Anyway, so Listenwise put out this white paper, and they basically found that kids' ability to understand listening is several grade levels higher than their reading comprehension. So they can listen to much more sophisticated and complicated material than they could read. So, I mean, that's one reason, is you can get a lot deeper and a lot more difficult than, The Cat in the Hat. I mean, it's a great book, but not a lot of science in there. So that's one good reason to do listening. And another good reason is, especially in these days where everybody's remote and we're all staring at screens for untold hours per day, it is a good way to give your students an activity to do that detaches them from a screen, potentially, and maybe even gets them outside and walking around. You can listen to podcasts doing anything. You don't have to be staring and watching it the way you do a video or a Zoom call, or even like reading a PDF on an iPad or something. Like, you could assign any kind of listening and say, go on a walk and listen to this thing, or go into your room and listen to this thing, or take out a piece of paper and draw and listen to this thing. Or you're not limited in the way that you would be with videos or other such things. And another thing, and this is maybe segueing to something I did kind of want to bring up, which is the audio course that we developed for Himalaya. Cool. Which, audio listening is really intimate and immersive in a way that lots of other media kind of aren't. That I can't remember which study did this, but basically they found that people's relationship with an audio only person is much stronger and intimate than it is with video or TV or anything like that.
Wow, I didn't know that. That's cool.
So it's you have a stronger connection to the material, and if there's audio that's really using the potentiality of that media, which is what we tried to do in our audio course, of making it interactive, or guiding them through an experience that they're having in three-dimensional world, it can be a lot more engaging and deeper than other types of content that you might put on your Google Classroom as a remote learning experience.
Wow. That is awesome. And I feel like definitely all those things you said, I feel like those are great reasons that you could add it and great ways you can add it. As far as like a classroom teacher, how do you like envision it being used? So like, do you envision it being used when kids are all together or separately? Or they listen to it out loud in one classroom together?
I mean, I think it depends on, what type of podcast you're using. So if you're using one of our regular episodes, um, I would probably, Naomi, you'll have to tell me if you found this in your experience, but our episodes are a bit on the long side
Mhm.
for elementary classroom time. So probably, I wouldn't want them to just be listening for more than 5 minutes at a stretch.
That's what we did
Um,
for sure. Yeah, like we would break it up.
yeah.
And it was hard at first, not in a bad way, just the kids weren't used to listening. I had kids asking me, "Where's the screen?" And so they're like, "I want to see it. I want to see it." I'm like, "Well, we're working on our listening. You're working on your visualization." But I agree with you. Like we would take breaks, or we would take us a couple days in a good way. Like, I mean, just their attention span in general. um,
Yeah.
but definitely, and they got way better at it, and they really enjoy it. But yes,
Well,
I
that's great. That's
mhm.
that's great to hear. Yeah. I mean, I would probably do like a 5 minute segment and then debrief it, talk about it. I might even set them up with like a specific activity beforehand. Like, we're going to listen and I want you to draw what you hear. Or, I know what some teachers do is they use the podcast to cover transition times.
Ooh, nice.
Um, so it'll be like, like when they've got classroom jobs or something and the kids have to clean up, like they'll play the podcast because that's way more like, and I mean, besides like all the educational value, just like I've been in an elementary classroom enough to know that like you really need to strongly incentivize kids to be quiet during cleanup. Otherwise, it's going to be a nightmare for everyone.
Yep.
um, so it can be, even if it's not educational, if they get nothing else out of it, it can be a good way to keep them quiet during cleanup.
Yeah.
So,
And I think
um,
too, when it's like playing like that, you never know what a kid's going to take away. And I think that's the cool part about like podcasts and audio. Like I know when I'm listening to like books in my car, like I listen to a lot of books on my way to work, and a lot of different podcasts. Like sometimes I'll listen to an episode and then I'll go back and I'll re-listen to it. And then I'll take something completely different away than I did the first time.
yeah.
I
Or if
mean,
you have, three people listening to something, it's just like, did we all listen to the same thing?
Yes.
yeah.
So.
Do you see that a lot with like kids that listen and different people like that?
There's excuse me. There's a certain different amount of like, I'm trying to think. I mean, different kids do pick up on different things, and it's interesting. We did um during the month of October, we did a Patreon membership drive with a friend of mine who is a bat puppet. Um, and a surprisingly large number of kids took the bat puppet. Like that was their main takeaway,
Okay.
was the bat puppet. So, maybe not what we were trying to do, but the puppet was cool.
Yeah.
How do you find the experts that you guys talk to? Because I know that can be hard, like as a classroom teacher or like a STEM teacher, like you want kids to hear from an expert because has so much value. But where do you find all these experts?
Well, let's see. I mean, this is mainly Lindsay's job. I mean, she was a science reporter before we started this podcast, so she was kind of already on this beat. She just never done it for kids before.
Mhm.
I can tell you, we started out just by booking all of our friends. We happened to have, just a number of people who had done research in science fields, and we could have them on and have them talk, tell interesting stories. Like our first episode about the Barton Springs salamander was actually a very good friend of ours was the guest, and she just told us about her PhD research. Our episode about the oh God, what was the name of the guy who had the spike go through his brain, and that's where neuroscience comes
Oh,
from?
I know who you're talking about. What is his name?
Phineas Gage.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Our episode, that episode was a friend of ours who's a neuroscientist, and she just thought that was the coolest story ever, and she wanted to tell it. And it is a crazy story. I don't know if you are familiar with the story of Phineas Gage, but he was a railroad worker, and he was hammering on a railroad spike, and something happened, and it went like straight through his brain.
Mm-hmm.
And he basically got an involuntary lobotomy, and somehow survived, but his personality was completely changed afterwards. And so that sort of sparked this whole study of like, well, maybe different parts of the brain are responsible for our behavior. And this is back in 1880, I think it was, maybe even earlier. But anyway, I mean, so that's a rambling answer to your question.
No, that's a good answer right there. I like that.
I think it's super
interesting. Yeah, but I think just start with your own network. And if you're a science teacher, you probably have someone you went to college with who's still pursuing science in some capacity, or there's not a single city in the United States that's not within an hour's drive from a university. So there's someone over there doing research that you can connect with. I think we had a real advantage because we were in Austin before we moved. The University of Texas was right there, so
that's cool.
It was pretty easy to be connected, and Lindsay was already pretty connected because of her career in science journalism.
Right. That's cool.
That's awesome.
So
I'm amazed if you guys don't know. I'm totally preaching. He's preaching to the choir here. I'm all fans Tumble Science Podcast. But where can people find you, and where can I get that Himalaya course? I'm very interested in that. Where can our listeners connect with you after the episode?
Yeah, sure. Well, you can find our website, sciencepodcastforkids.com. The Tumble Science Podcast is available on everything, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and so on. The pod course is only available on the Himalaya app, so you'd have to download that app and then sign up for the course that way. If you want to do it with your classroom, it's a touch complicated because it's not really designed for, the app isn't designed for classrooms, but you can send me an email at marshall@tumblepodcast.com. That's MARSHALL. And I'll get you set up for a classroom account on the Himalaya app.
Cool. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We are so happy to have you. And I know that our listeners learned so much from you, because we definitely did. For our listeners out there, you can find us at Innovative Teacher Podcast on Instagram. We love chatting with you guys on there. Also our website, innovativeteacherpodcast.com. But if you have any questions, let us know, send us an email, and we will definitely love collaborating and chatting with you. And we'll see you guys in the next episode.